So, in today's episode, I'm going to talk about when I think people should stay in the relationship that is struggling and try to work it out. As many of you might know, that I have a lot of content about, the bravery that it takes to walk away from a relationship that's not working. Last week's episode, I talked about how important it is to let go of the wrong person and to choose yourself. And all of that is true, but there are also circumstances where the most courageous thing to do is to stay in the relationship and work on it. And working on a relationship really is working on ourselves. It's working on the parts of us that are afraid that we're not enough, resistant to change, the parts of us that is very dominated by the ego, that doesn't want to take responsibility, the parts that we have to sort of overcome, the hurt parts of ourselves to see how maybe we have been hurting the other as well. It takes a tremendous amount of courage to stay in a relationship. It takes a lot of courage to love. The path of intimacy, emotional intimacy, is 10 times more powerful of a spiritual path than the path of isolation. A lot of people come to me and say, I've been single, I've been working on myself, I finally feel healed, I feel confident, and then I get into a relationship and all my stuff comes up, and all of a sudden I'm brutally reminded of the fact that I am not as healed that I thought I was. And that's because that's what will happen. We are going to be confronted with a lot of old belief systems about who the right person is versus who the right person isn't, the one soulmate. It's really easy to thrive in isolation. And what I mean by isolation, I don't mean without community. I mean in isolation, meaning isolating yourself from romantic relationships. And I am completely in support of people who choose to be single and feel very fulfilled single. I mean, I feel very, very fulfilled in many ways single, and have felt fulfilled single. But there is, there's no other place where you will grow emotionally, psychologically, spiritually than you will in a romantic relationship, even if it's not the right relationship, but especially if it's the right relationship. And that's what this episode really is about, doing the work to make it work. And this is for anyone who finds themselves in a scenario where maybe your relationship is not as healthy as you want it to be. Maybe you're unhappy, but it's not toxic. There's no abuse. You love this person. Maybe you have children with this person and you don't want to lose your family. Maybe you're just overridden with ambivalence about whether or not this is the right relationship. Maybe you're having a lot of fights where the two of you are talking about ending the relationship. You're in dire straits with your relationship. And here's the thing. Relationships rarely end because people stop loving each other. They more commonly end because people don't feel that they are enough for each other. The first step that I would have you do, and I don't know you, and this is obviously, I'm saying this very generally, but when people have come to me, couples have come to me and they really want to work it out, but they're in that position where they don't know how to make it work out. And they're like right in the brink of breaking up. Or sometimes I have an individual come to me and they're just not sure if they love the person anymore. Typically what's happening is when we get pushed to the edge of our insecurity, when we get pushed to the edge of our fears in a relationship, we will start to see that the other person is the problem. And one of the things that we do that we do this unconsciously in order to prepare ourselves to exit the relationship is we start hyper-focusing on all the things that's wrong with our partner, because that actually makes it easier to let go. And because then we can easily justify, we can justify our decision to go. Now, one thing that I want to point out is that, a lot of times you've seen my content saying, the bravest thing to do is to walk away from a relationship that's not working. Part of that is because, generally speaking, women have a habit of staying too long in relationships that are not working. And generally speaking, men have a habit of leaving too soon. When you're in a scenario like this, you really have to ask yourself, how much is it my pattern to flee when something's not working? And how much is it my pattern to stay no matter what? If you date women, or even if you don't date women, there must be a woman, a female that you love. Maybe it's your daughter, maybe it's your mom, maybe it's your sister, maybe it's a friend. It's quite rare that women leave relationships when they're unfulfilled. Yes, they can. Lots of women, there's infidelity. Lots of women will leave, but they have to be incredibly unfulfilled, incredibly unhappy. Most women will do whatever it takes to maintain the connection. When we're thinking about these dynamics, it's not just anxious attachment. It's not just avoidant attachment. It's also deeply personal. It's also the conditioning of women not wanting to, not just the conditioning, but part of our natures. We just value connection so highly, and losing connection is just incredibly tough. Men in general tend to lean towards wanting their freedom. And again, there's nuance to this, of course, but I think it's worth mentioning. And so we have to, whenever we're thinking about, do I stay or do I go? We have to confront the fleer inside of us, the part of us that just wants to kind of flee. Because a relationship is a place where we go to confront ourselves, not to avoid ourselves. And that's why, circling back to my original point, it is easier, it's a lot easier to reach, I'm saying this in jest, enlightenment alone, because we are not confronting ourselves quite the same way as we are in a romantic relationship. We are never more vulnerable than we are in a romantic relationship. We are never more fearful that we are not enough in some way. To make a relationship work takes a lot of courage. Without question, there are relationships that I think should end. People who I've worked with, and I've helped a lot of people exit really unhealthy relationships. But the sad truth, but it's an important truth to point out, is that there's a lot of relationships that I feel as though both people were actually right for each other, but they did not know how to make it work. So if you're in this scenario, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, how have I been punishing my partner? How have I been punishing my partner? And what I mean by that is, how have I been pulling away? How have I been withholding my love? And let's just shelve attachment styles right now, because when we build up enough resentment, and I'll get to that in a moment, in our bodies, in our minds, we build up resistance. And when we build up resistance, it's like we're like shut down and we're not so open to love. And so some people will pull away. Some people will try to manipulate. Some people will do lots and lots of stonewalling, silent treatment, whatever it is. That's highly, highly dysfunctional, by the way. But how have I been punishing my partner? Am I punishing them in my head? Am I making them out to be the villain all the time in my mind? Am I talking terribly about them to my friends and to my family? if I'm really truthful with myself, have I not been showing them the love that I normally show? Do I know what their favorite snack is that I used to always get them, on my way home from work or whatever, and now I've just decided not to do that anymore? Number 2, do I know what my partner's dreams and needs are? The amount of times that I have had someone sit down, or even a couple sit down with me, and it's like they're strangers to each other. They really stopped being curious. And part of the stopping being curious is because when we become ambivalent in a relationship, we get so focused on our own needs. And like I said earlier, so focused on the ways in which they are not enough for us, that we lose sight of the fact that we are no longer, or have maybe never been, an expert on our partner. Really close couples are almost like experts of each other. They are intensely curious about each other. And the amount of times that people have come to me and, to talk about their partner, couples have come to me, and it's like they live under the same roof. They know each other's habits, but they're also strangers to each other. They don't know each other's dreams. They don't know each other's greatest fears. And they don't know each other's needs, meaning they don't actually understand and know what makes the other person feel loved. They don't know or understand what makes the other person, makes their partner feel important and significant to them. They don't know what the things that they do that makes their partner feel safe or unsafe. Like, they actually don't know, because most of the time we get into a relationship and we are loving based on our own understanding of love and our own conditions about what has to happen in order to be loved. So in other words, if we like receiving love a certain way, we give that love in a certain way, as opposed to really knowing what makes someone feel loved. Being in a relationship is a very selfless act. This is not about, let's not pathologize this, right? This is not about ignoring yourself, betraying yourself. I have tons of content about that. This is really just about, how do we get out of our own way and really love someone? And we can't leave a relationship, provided that it's not all the things abusive, totally wrong. There's a lot. I have other episodes on this on Jillian On Love to help you make this difficult decision. So just wanted to say that. But we can't leave a relationship before we really evaluate our role in the whatever is not working. And it takes a tremendous amount of humility to be able to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, how might I be contributing to whatever is not working in this dynamic? How have I not been loving? Do I even know what their needs are? Or have I just been focused on myself? Because when we are considering ending a relationship, or we're unhappy in a relationship, we go into, a little bit of fight or flight. It's like, do I stay and fight for this relationship, or do I flee? And we're kind of caught in that. And when we are in that sort of nervous system state, we get very, very, very self-consumed. And part of working on a relationship is understanding how we are contributing to whatever's not working. And that includes, I should say, rather, how we've been with punishing our partner, how we've been withholding love, how we've been speaking about them in our minds, or even to the people we care about. How have we just been focusing on our own needs? Have you communicated your needs? When you peel away the onion of a relationship and its problems, at the core, what you will almost always find is a communication breakdown. And instead of communicating, we get in our heads and we create all these meanings and stories about our partner. And we get very seduced by the story. And then we're no longer in a relationship with the person who we claim to love. Instead, we're in a relationship with the story that we have about them. And sometimes that story gets so out of control. The story gets so big, it almost takes on a life of its own. And so instead of being in a relationship with your partner and with your loved one, you're in a relationship with the story that you have about them. And the bigger that story, the greater your resentment. And the greater your resentment, the more resistance you have to your partner. And then when we start to build resistance, we start to hyper-focus on what's wrong with them. We start to lose attraction. We start to punish them. And we're not, healthy people are punishing their partners all the time, meaning, and what I mean by that is they're not doing it on purpose, right? There's no ill will manipulation behind it. It's almost unconscious. Yes, it is a sign of that there needs to be some maturing for sure. It's certainly not a good habit, but the more resistance that we build inside of ourselves, the more then we will start to pull love away. And then we can justify it over and over again about, well, they're not doing this and that and that and this and that. And then what ends up happening is that we never take a look at ourselves and see how might my behavior, how might my energy, how might the way that I'm showing up in this relationship be creating a snowball effect and to the point where it's impacting my partner and how they're relating to me. So once you can start to see that you're part of a dynamic, and that dynamic is largely made up of old patterns, beliefs, and stories that we have about our partner and about the relationship. So accountability is literally, in my book, I think it's probably the most important part of a relationship, because when we do have all those stories and the stories that lead to resentment and the resentment that feeds the story and it just keeps spiraling. And then we build that resistance against our partner, and it's a physical resistance. We don't even want to be close to them physically in some ways. It's a mental resistance, an emotional resistance. We don't want to let them in. Or maybe we do a little bit and then we pull away, and then we do a little bit, then we pull away. We're doing that out of fear. We're doing that out of hurt, but we are sabotaging the relationship greatly. And when we can see how this person, when we can remember the love, and that person is not someone who's there to take away your freedom, to hurt you, to abandon you, but there's someone who has needs too and is afraid too, we can soften inside. Now, look, you probably, or you might need the work of, some couples counseling. Maybe you better find a good one, because that's, it's not always helpful, but you need to just find someone really good. Maybe it's doing a couples workshop. Maybe it's just listening to these episodes. So don't think that because you might need third-party help that things are really bad. It's just, no one will get in your own way more than you, just like I get in my own way. No one's going to lie more to you than you do to yourself. And so this is it's the ultimate surrender of just letting go and being like, okay, I am ready to see this relationship and our situation differently. I'm ready to look at my role in this. So you have to know their needs, and you have to be communicating your needs, because a lot of times people don't communicate their needs. They think that the other person should know. Or most of the time, people don't even know what their needs are, or their needs get so convoluted because they're in that state of resentment and resistance. And I think that, a lot of people in a, let's say in a heterosexual relationship where it's a man and a woman in a relationship together, what's added to that is, a lack of understanding of the opposite sex and what's important to them, and also just our own biases. Part of becoming more emotionally aware, mature, conscious people in relationships is being able to let go, surrender the ego, and to look within, and to we can acknowledge our pain, we can acknowledge our hurt, we can acknowledge our fear. But if we want to really make it work with someone, we have to be able to acknowledge theirs too. And there's a really interesting story. Let's just say this. Let's say Joe. We'll give him a fake name. Married for 8 years to his wife. They have a daughter. And he's really contemplating leaving the relationship, ending the marriage. But he does love her and he doesn't want to break up the family, but he's unhappy. So to deal with his unhappiness, he starts to seek out meeting his needs outside of the relationship, not in infidelity, but this is what people do. And this is something that you need to ask yourself. How have I been looking to fulfill myself outside of the relationship? And then consequently, no longer giving my relationship the energy of me in it. So let's just say, this is a large part of what happens with infidelity, but infidelity aside, maybe it's focusing on your work or your hobbies or your friends. You're focusing on everything except your relationship. And you're bringing all this energy to these other sources, but then when you come home, you have no energy for your partner. So Joe, he's in a band. And so when he is, not getting along with his wife, he's putting extra energy in the band, traveling with the band. That's where he feels free. That's where he feels like a god on stage and whatnot. And then he comes home and he doesn't feel enough for his wife. So when I tell that story, one can easily come up with their own story, because whenever we hear things like this, we're looking at the world through the filter of our own experience. That's what happens all over social media. Someone shares their experience and they're like, oh my God, that's horrible. You should leave them. And then other people are like, well, I've been on the other side of that, so I think what they're doing is horrible, right? So we have to be critical thinkers. So on the outside, it might think, oh yeah, well, he's not getting his needs met at home. Obviously, he's getting his needs met, doing the band. And, why should he stop doing something that's meaningful to him when, his wife doesn't even appreciate that? But there's always so much more to know. And there's always so much nuance. Part of the reason why she didn't want him to be in the band is because he puts all his energy in the band. And every time, they have a problem, that's where he goes instead of sticking around and trying to work it out with her. So she's gotten to the point of, you have to choose the band or me and your child. She's gotten to the ultimatum point. And so he feels like that's unfair. And yes, part of that is unfair. But also you have to understand she's been so pushed to that insecurity. They both have. So on the outside, the story is, well, he's thinking, well, we're not compatible because, she doesn't let me be in the band and I have to make a choice. And her story is he's always choosing the band over me. He doesn't care about me. When really what's happening is that when they would have arguments, instead of talking about it and repairing and giving each other more love, she would become more controlling. He would flee more, and they would just keep getting into this dynamic. But he was the one who really wanted to end the relationship. She wanted to, as a lot of women will, she really wanted to make it work, even though she was unhappy. Because a lot of women will want to make it work even if they're deeply unhappy. What Joe had to realize was that he had made a habit of bringing no energy home to his wife at all. And that part of her clinging to him was because she felt so insignificant to him. And it does not mean that she's now the victim and he's the villain. It's not that. She had plenty to be responsible for. But since he was the one who was like it was hanging over her head, like I'm going to leave. He took control in the relationship and basically was like, he was the person who is talking about ending the relationship, the person who is always withdrawing, the person who is ambivalent about the relationship is the person who has all the power in the relationship. So he had all this power and she felt totally powerless. But what he didn't realize was his contribution to what was not working, and that he had gotten so fixated on she doesn't want me to fulfill my dreams, when he didn't realize that he didn't even know what her dreams were. He wasn't giving her love in the way that he used to, and that he's made something outside of their marriage far more important than her. And so she felt pushed to the edge of her insecurity and basically was like, you have a choice, me or them. So there's a lot going on here, but it was only until Joe began to realize that he could be this one way with the band and then, one way with his daughter and one way with his wife. And he wasn't bringing any energy home. And the more that he was doing that, the more insecure, understandably, his wife was and was becoming. And then she didn't know how to handle it. So then, the way that she kind of behaved and, wanting to control, wasn't her best self, because he was the one who wanted to leave. He had to see how he was actually creating the conditions that he said he didn't want to have. Because if we just leave a relationship and we don't look at our part in the dynamic, which can be incredibly nuanced, we will flee, we will find someone else, and we will do the exact same thing. In his mind is, I just need to find someone else who understands me better. The truth was, this was just, he was part of a dynamic and a pattern where he was not actually showing up and he wasn't taking responsibility. She had to take responsibility too. Again, I'm just showing it from his perspective because he was the one who wanted to leave. They worked it out, and they worked it out quite powerfully, and they're thriving today. But I share that because it's a very, very important example that if you just want to go and you don't see your role and you're not seeing how might your behavior is impacting someone else, your partner, I should say, then the chances of these patterns repeating themselves in other relationships are very high. That doesn't mean, of course, you can see your patterns, you can see your role, and then the two of you can decide that you're just not on the same page. You don't have the same values. You don't have the same vision. You don't have to be on the same path, but you have to agree on where the path is going. Like, you have to have some sort of alignment there for sure to make sure that we are just not repeating patterns and that we don't sabotage something, based on our own ego and our own fears. We have to see our part. And for Joe, a large part of seeing his part was him acknowledging the story that he had about her, his wife, the resistance that he built inside of him, the resentment and the resistance, the way that he was actually he was only focusing on him and his needs, and he wasn't thinking at all about her and her needs. And then the behavior of making something outside of the marriage way more important than your marriage. And then, that's a slippery slope. And I'm all for, I'm all for having things outside of your relationship that light you up. But then you should bring that light home to your partner. When we have things outside, people, places, things that light us up, that give our lives meaning outside of a marriage, outside of a relationship, and then we bring home, we don't bring that person, that lit up person at home. We only come alive in those outside scenarios. That is putting other things in front of your marriage or your relationship, and that is a recipe for disaster. The point, the beauty is having the meaning and the purpose and the things that light you up outside of the relationship, and then bringing that person to the relationship. That's what creates magic. And so a last thing that I will say about communication is, I've said before, like, stay in your head and I've said it before and you may have heard it, but if you stay in your head, your relationship is dead. And the stories and the meanings that we create, and then the lack of communication, the vulnerability is, and look, communication can be very, very difficult, but it really is at the core of what breaks down a relationship. Probably one of the hardest yet most important things to do when you are in this kind of scenario is to really try to get underneath what you think the problem is and get to the root of the problem. And typically what I have found to be at the root of all the relationship problems that I have dealt with, that I have helped other people come to terms with, is this not feeling enough for the other person in some way, not feeling like you're their man, not feeling like you're their woman, not feeling like you're cherished, not feeling like you're appreciated. And so when we can soften our egos and take responsibility for how we might have been not making our partner feel special to us, that's when things can start to shift.